Cold at a certain hour stops being weather and becomes a thing with intent. A slow, patient hand that has decided, without heat and without hurry, to take you apart finger by finger. And the woman at the black window of the relay station felt that hand on her that night and did not yet understand it had already been sent for her on purpose. She stood in the dark of the through room with the lamp blown out so no one outside would mark her, and through the frost-furred glass she watched a single rider come up to the stalled night coach in the swirling snow, swing down easy as a man at his own gate, and fit a key. A key. Not a bar, not a charge of powder. A key. To the brass-bound strongbox in the boot, lift out the canvas sacks of gold dust the line had sworn to carry safe to the bank below, and tip a fistful of spent cartridges and a torn black neckerchief into the trampled snow to leave the sign of robbers who had never been there. She knew him. God help her. She knew the cut of that caped coat, because every soul on the line knew the man the company sent to hunt its own robbers. And she stood there with her breath stopped in her chest and understood, all at once and far too late, that she was the only living thing on that mountain that had seen the wolf wearing the shepherd's coat. The rider's head came up. For one terrible heartbeat he seemed to look straight at the dark window where she stood, and a voice in the snow, low and reasonable and worse than any shout, said into the night, "Anybody fool enough to winter up here alone won't see another thaw anyhow." And he stepped back into the saddle and was gone, and left her with it. Rewind. 6 days before a company decided the easiest way to bury a witness was to let a mountain do it. The woman who would owe a stranger her whole life and hate herself for needing to was standing at a composing stone in a dying camp newspaper office, setting her dead husband's last unprinted column into a galley, one cold letter at a time. Her name was Nora Hale, knell to the two people who had ever said it gently, and both of them now in the ground. And she was nobody at all in that camp, a young widow with a trade that lived on lamp oil and credit and a man's good name, and now the man and the name and the credit were all in the same grave. She had grown up in a river town east of the mountains, where her father kept a small jobbing print shop, and her mother set type beside him. And Nora had learned the case before she learned her letters, to read a line of metal upside down and backwards the way other children learn to read a clock, and she had married a quiet, careful man off her father's own composing floor, Ezra Hale, with a cough he made light of and a dream of his own paper in the new country. They had come west on a printer's promise and a press freighted up in pieces, set up the Drums Pass Clarion in a one-room shop in a rotting silver camp, and for 2 years printed the ore prices and the marriages and the deaths and, lately, the things the camp would rather not have seen in print. The cough did not make light of itself. It took him in the spring, and a print shop is a thing you cannot eat, so when the express and stage line that ran the high road over Drums Pass let it be known they wanted a keeper for the relay station at the summit, to cook for the through coaches, tend the swing teams, keep the place against weather, and mind the strongbox window where the gold shipments lay over between drivers, Nora Hale took it, because it was board and a roof and a wage promised come spring, and because there was nothing behind her but a dead trade and a debt on a press. And the 3 things the frontier knows best how to turn against a woman are to be young, to be widowed, and to be poor. And she was all 3 at once. She did not know, climbing up with a carpet bag and her husband's brass make-up rule on a thong at her throat, that she was being set like a piece on a board. She thought she had found the one safe corner of a cruel country. She had found the exact spot a thief would one day need a witness to disappear. The station sat at the top of the world, the last built thing before the pass went over into rock and sky, a long low log building with a through room, a kitchen, and a loft, a pole stable, a hay shed, a spring house, all backed under a shoulder of the mountain where the wind could not quite get its full teeth in. Below it the road switched back down 9 hard miles to Drum's Hollow, the Silver Camp. Above it climbed 2 more to the summit and dropped away east toward the bank towns and the rails. 6 days a week the coaches came through, the down coaches heavy with gold dust off the diggings, and Nora cooked and hauled water and forked hay and swung the cold teams in their traces with hands that had only ever set type, and learned the work by getting it wrong and being too stubborn to quit. The drivers were rough and not unkind, the loneliness past anything she had known. And the strongbox window, a little barred shelf off the through room where the consigned gold lay locked over between drivers, she minded but never touched, because the only keys to those brass boxes hung in the company office far below, and the only man besides a driver who carried one was the express superintendent himself. His name was Burl Vane, and he was the law of the line the way frost is the law of a window, completely and from the inside. He was the company's special officer, the man they paid to ride the road, guard the shipments, and run down the road agents who the last 2 winters had been hitting the down coaches and lifting the gold clean away and never once being caught. Lean and dry and pleasant in a way that left you feeling counted, a man of about 48 in a long caped coat and a low felt hat, and when he came up to look the place over before the snows he was courteous, asked after her dead husband's paper, said the line was glad of a steady hand at the summit, and all the while his pale flat eyes went over the station and the road and the long empty, miles the way a man measures a room he means to use. She thought him cold, but correct. She did not yet know that the reason the company's own officer had never caught the road agent was that he was the road agent, that he had bled his own line for 2 winters with the company's keys and the company's trust, salting the road with the stage sign of phantom masked riders, and that he had ridden up not to guard the station, but to learn its sightlines, because a man who robs his own coaches has one mortal weakness, which is a window with a witness in it. The first hard storm of the winter came down early and mean, a 3-day blow that shut the pass and stranded a single down coach at the station overnight, its strongbox heavy with a month of the camp's gold, its driver and 1 passenger bedded down in the loft while the wind screamed and Nora kept the stove and could not sleep. And in the dead middle of the second night, through the frost-furred glass with her lamp blown dark, she saw the whole of it, the company's own special officer riding in alone. The key, the lifted gold, the false robber signs scattered in the snow. The thing 2 winters of company men had failed to see, the wolf in the shepherd's coat, and she stood frozen at the glass with her hand at the brass rule on its thong and understood that the safe corner she had climbed to was the most dangerous place in the territory, because she was now the one living soul who could put a rope around Burl Vane's neck, and Vane, sitting his horse in the snow, lifted his head toward the dark window, said the thing that told her he knew, and rode away. If you have ever lain awake in a cold room at the top of the world, doing the arithmetic of your own murder, certain a powerful man has decided you are worth more dead than alive, and uncertain only of the hour and the shape it will take, then you already know the cold that settled into Nura Hale that night, and you know it is a colder thing than any mountain. Stay up here with me a while, because that is the country this whole channel was built to walk, the steep frozen distance between the death a hard world has quietly written beside your name and the life you would die climbing toward instead. And how the toughest souls on God's earth sometimes find each other in the very place they were each meant to disappear. Subscribe and keep the notifications on, because the lamp's always burning up here at Timberline Hearts, and there's another soul climbing out of the cold every single week. She did not sleep at all that night. By morning the storm had blown itself ragged, the driver dug the down coach out and took it, and his passenger and its lightened strongbox on down, never knowing the box had been robbed in the night and relocked, because Vane had the only key, and a robbed box locked again looks exactly like a box never touched, until it is opened far below and found light. Nora watched the coach go, and made the decision any honest soul makes, and that nearly killed her, which was that she would tell. She would write it down, a printer writes things down, and carry it to someone above Vane, to the company's head office east, or to the federal man who came through with the circuit court in the spring. Because the gold the line carried fell under the law, and a thief of it could be reached by more than the company that employed him. She set down in her small exact hand the date, the hour, the key, the caped coat, and the staged sign in the snow, sewed it into the hem of her underskirt the way her mother had taught her to carry a thing that mattered, and felt, for one foolish morning, that she had done the safe thing by doing the right thing. She had no idea the man she meant to expose had already chosen her death, and that it would not come with a gun. It came, instead, with a feed wagon. 3 days after the storm, before the next big snow could close the pass for good, a company feed wagon ground up the road from Drum's Hollow, with a driver Nora half knew, and a folded letter under the company's seal, and the driver, not meeting her eye, told her the line had decided to shut the Summit station early this year, the season judged too far gone. The road too dangerous to run coaches over the top, that the swing teams and the hay and the relief man were all to come down today, and her service was ended with thanks. She stood in the yard and felt the trap close so quietly she almost mistook it for mercy. Closing a station early was reasonable. The pass did close, lines did pull their Summit stations, but the letter said nothing of the wage she had been promised, and when she asked plainly how she was to come down, the driver looked at the team and nodded at her, and said his orders were the stock and the hay and the relief man, that there was no room nor order for the keeper, and that someone would surely send up for her before the deep snow. Surely, and Nora watched the company strip the station of every team and every wisp of feed and the one other living man on the mountain, load it all on the wagon, and turn it down the road, leaving her alone at a dead relay station 4,000 feet up with a week's flour, no horse, no pay, and the whole sky going the color of more snow. And she understood exactly what was being done to her, and exactly how clean it would look in the spring, because that was the genius of it, and the horror. Burl Vane did not have to lay a hand on her. He had only to do the most ordinary thing in the world, close a high station early, which any line might do, with a letter any clerk might sign, and let the mountain be the murderer. When the thaw came, they would find a foolish widow who had not had the sense to come down before the snow, frozen at her abandoned post, and there would be no wound and no powder and no mark on the company's officer, who had in fact signed an order trying to bring the stock down to safety. A robbed box opened far below, a phantom road agent he was even now diligently hunting, and a witness who simply, sadly, did not survive a winter she was warned about. Every piece lawful, every piece deniable. And Nora stood in the emptying yard and felt the old cold of the courtroom the poor always know, the cold of a world that arranges your ruin so the arranging itself looks like kindness, and did the only thing left to her, barred the door, built up the fire with the last cut wood, and began to ration a week of flour against a winter of snow, and tried, with a printer's stubbornness, not to die to spite a man who was counting on her dying quietly. She lasted longer than he reckoned, because Burl Vane had measured the gold in the sightlines, but had not measured Nora Hale. She broke up a feed bin and a bench and a corral pole for fuel, found a sack of cracked corn meant for the gone teams and a little salt pork the company had not troubled to take, and stretched it. She melted snow, kept the fire small, slept by it in all her clothes, and watched the road below fill in and vanish switchback by switchback, until there was no road at all, only a white slope where a road had been, and the last thread tying the summit to the world below went under and was gone. And somewhere in the second week, when the meal was nearly out, and the cold had got so far into her she could no longer feel her feet, and her thoughts had begun to come slow and warm and dangerous, Nora understood the man had been right about the mountain after all, that she was going to die at her post as he had planned. And she did the last thing her stubbornness had left her, put on every stitch she owned, and the brass rule, cold at her throat, and went out into the white to walk down a road that was no longer there, because she would rather die moving than die waiting to be found. She did not get far. The snow was past her knees and then past her waist, and the cold took the strength out of her by the yard, and somewhere below the station she went down in a drift and could not get up, and the snow began, almost tenderly, to cover her, and she thought, with the strange clear calm that comes at the end of the cold, of her mother's hands flying over the case, and the small bright click of type going home, and she closed her eyes. And that should have been the whole of it. The clean, quiet murder Burl Vane had ordered up out of the mountain. A woman who simply did not last the winter. Except that there was, that year, one other living soul who walked the high country in the deep of winter and feared nothing the cold could do. And he was, by the grace of whatever watches over the lost, coming down off the high line that very afternoon with a string of frozen marten on his pack. And he cut her trail where it should not have been, a single floundering track wandering off a dead road into the open snow, and followed it down to a drift with a hand sticking out of it, and a worn brass rule on a thong catching the last gray light. His name was Cal Traeger, and he had not gone looking for her or for anyone, because Cal Traeger had spent 11 winters making very sure there was no one left to look for. A fur trapper, a big, slow-moving man of about 38, built long and heavy through the shoulders, weather-browned, long dark hair and a heavy beard, a knife scar through his left brow and a nose broken more than once, carrying the smell of wet hide and pine pitch and cold iron, and the silence of a man with little call for words in a decade. He had come west out of the war, Shiloh, and the year after, and things he did not speak of, gone up into the Bitterroot high country the way a wounded animal goes to ground, and let the world below forget there had ever been such a man. He saw the hand in the drift and did not stop to wonder how it came there. He dug her out with his bare hands and got her up across his shoulders. A slight frozen weight that still, just barely, breathed and turned off the dead road and carried her up his own hard mile to the one warm thing in all that white. A cabin built against a cliff with a banked stove breathing in the dark. And that carry, that one stubborn refusal to let the cold have one more body, was the beginning of the end of two people's long arrangement to die alone. She came back to herself slowly, and from very far down, in a dim, close room gone gold at one end where a fire burned, wrapped in blankets and furs that smelled of pine and smoke, and another person, with a deep, all-over ache that meant she had not, against every odd, lost any part of herself to the frost. The last thing she had known was the drift and the dark and the small, bright click of remembered type, and now there was heat and the weight of furs and the sense of a great still presence in the room, and the old reflex of a cornered woman came up hard through the fog, that every warmth is the first half of a bill. She got an arm under herself, and a low voice out of the dimness said, not unkindly, "Lie still. You've been 3 days thawing and your feet near went. They didn't. Let them hurt." And she lay still, because she had no strength to do otherwise, and watched the dark shape resolve into a mountain of a man feeding the stove with his back half to her, and waited, heart going hard, for the moment the terms would be named. They were not named. He brought her broth boiled down thin, and did not hand it to her, but set it on a round of log within her reach so a weak person did not have to ask, and said, "Drink that when you can." Slow, when she found her voice it came cracked and suspicious, and the first thing she asked was where she was and what he wanted. "You're up the cliff, 2 drainages off the pass road. I trapped these drainages. I found you walking off a dead road into open snow, which is a thing only the lost and the left do. He set another stick on the fire. Name's Cal Traeger. If you need a thing to call me. I don't want anything. You can stop looking for the price. There isn't one. And Nora Hale, who had spent her whole life believing everything cost what the man holding it decided it cost, lay in a stranger's furs and could not for the life of her make the words mean what they said. The cabin was 1 room against the cliff, a stone chimney, 1 shuttered window, a low door, a rope bed, a plank table, 2 rounds of log, a shelf of tins, a lean-to off the back where a goat complained and a horse shifted in the dark. On the wall, in a grated oiled row, his traps over the door on 2 pegs, a lever-action rifle, cleaned and waiting, and Nora understood from the bone-deep order of the place that this was a man who kept his dangerous things exactly where his hand would find them in the black dark, and had stayed alive up here alone a long time by letting nothing be out of its place. He did not, those first days, ask how a woman came to be walking off a dead road, and she kept waiting for the question that would be the lever, and it did not come. Only later did she understand he had read most of it already off the company cut clothes and the printer's stained hands and the way she flinched at a raised arm, and that he, of all men, had needed very little explaining. When the early dark came down that first whole evening, Cal took a bedroll and a wolf robe off the wall and carried them toward the lean-to to bed down with the animals in the cold, and over his shoulder, flat as a man reporting the weather, said the thing that began, against every wall she had, to undo her. I won't touch you. Door bars from the inside, there's the bar across it. Throw it if it sits easier. And he went out and pulled the door to behind him, and left a woman who had been abandoned to die 3 days before, alone in a warm room with food she had not paid for, and a heavy oak bar she was welcome to drop against him. Nora did not sleep at first. She lay listening for the catch, the moment the bar would be tried from the other side. It did not come. And after a long while, when the heat had got far enough into her bones that her pride could no longer hold it off, she got up on her ruined feet and dropped the bar. Not against him, she told herself, but because dropping it was a thing she could do, 1 small coin of control on the far side of a winter that had taken everything else. And the last thing she thought before the dark took her was that this silent man unsettled her worse than Burl Vane had, because Vane she had understood in a single look, and this one she could not get the measure of at all. In the gray of the next morning, when her tongue had thawed enough to use, she told him the bones of it, that she had kept the summit station, seen the company's own special officer rob a coach he was paid to guard, watch the line close the station early and strip it and leave her with no way down, and believed she had been left to freeze on purpose so a thief would lose his witness without ever lifting a hand. She braced to be disbelieved, because a poor widow's word against a company officer is the lightest thing in the world. Cal listened to all of it without a word, feeding the fire, and when she was done he said something that was not comfort, and was better than comfort. I've cut the sign of those phantom road agents 2 winters running and never found where the men camped or the horses watered, because there were no men and no horses. 1 rider with a company key doesn't need a camp. His pale eyes were steady. I believe you. And a man who'd close a station early to let the cold do his killing will have to come back and make sure of it before the thaw, because a witness who's only maybe dead is no good to him. You didn't escape him by living. You just moved the reckoning to spring. And Nora, who had expected to be doubted or soothed, found herself instead simply believed and simply warned, and did not yet know which unnerved her more. If you've made it this far into Nell's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. She learned the shape of his silence over the days that followed, and learned it was not empty, but full, the way old timber is full. He rose before light and ran a trapline up the frozen drainages, skinned and fleshed in the cold blue evenings, the cabin filling with the green smell of hides and tallow. He spoke to her almost only in instruction. The spring out back, not the creek, for water that wouldn't gripe her. If anything comes into this yard on 2 legs or 4, you get behind the bar and you do not come out, not for any voice, not even mine. Never a word that could be mistaken for tenderness, and under every flat instruction, the same buried thing. Here is how you stay alive. It should have comforted her. Instead, after the first days of pure animal gratitude wore off, it made her wild, because his refusal to name a price, his refusal even to be thanked, was itself a kind of debt that grew by the day, compounding like a store account she had no way under heaven to discharge. And a debt you cannot pay is a hand at the throat to a person built the way Noura Hale was built. On the 4th morning she could not stand it any longer. She rose before he did, and built the fire and swept the room and had water on by the time he came in stamping cold off his boots, and she stood up straight with her chin high and said, hard, the way she had rehearsed it in the dark, I'll earn my keep. I'm not a beggar, and I won't be kept like one. And I won't be in any man's debt. Tell me what work pays for the food and the fire and the trouble of digging me out of a drift, and I'll do it, every hour, until it's square. She had meant it to sound like strength. It came out closer to pleading, and they both heard it. Cal looked at her a long moment, the scar pale through his brow in the firelight, and what he said was so quiet she nearly lost it under the stove. Stop trying to pay me back. He set down the brace of marten he carried. There's no bill. I didn't pull you out of the snow to write you a kinder note than the company did. You start keeping a ledger on a thing like staying alive, it never comes square, and you'll spend whatever time you've got left cold on the inside trying to make it. If you want to work because the work needs doing, and there's 2 mouths now where there was 1, then work, and welcome. But not to pay me. That I won't take off you. It should have freed her. And instead, it cracked something open. Because Noura Hale had spent her whole life believing that everything came at a price set by someone with more power than her. And here was a scarred, half-wild stranger telling her that the largest thing anyone had ever done for her had no price tag at all, was simply hers, free, a thing she would have to learn to carry instead of repay. She turned to the stove so he would not see her face. Then I'll work, because it needs doing, she said to the iron. And she did what her hands could not do at first. She learned one ruined thing at a time. Her printer's hands were already hard in their own way, strong in the fingers and the wrist from a lifetime of lifting type and locking up heavy forms and cranking a press. But the work up here found new places to break her. She burned her palm on the rendering kettle, laid her thumb open learning the skinning knife, raised blisters on the maul handle that wept until she could not close her fingers at night. Cal did not coddle her and did not mock her. When she cut herself, he washed it with spirit that made her hiss and said only, "Blade works toward the bone, not toward your hand. Turn it." On the 8th day, she split a whole rick of stove wood without weeping, and by the end of the 2nd week, she caught herself one evening turning her own hard ink-stained hands over in the firelight with a fierce, ugly pride she had no word for. And across the cabin she felt him notice, and neither of them said a thing. She learned the iron economy of the place by getting it wrong and being let to. You set a trap so it took the animal quick instead of slow, because Cal would not abide a slow death even in the creatures he killed to live, and that single fact told her more about the man than any confession could have. On the 14th morning, he handed her the skinning knife and stepped back, and she cut the first 2 deep and ruined a strip of fur worth real money, and waited for him to take the knife back. He did not. Again he said, and turned a second carcass toward her, and by the fourth her hands had found the clean, peeling pull that lifts the hide off in one piece, and she looked up, and he had already gone back to his own work, which was the only praise the man knew how to give, and the truest she had ever been given. And she found the trade was still in her hands, and worth something here, that a woman whose fingers know how to set a line of type tight and true, every piece squared and locked so the whole will not spill, has a feel for small exact work the mountain could use. She mended his snowshoe webbing and spliced his frayed pack lines, and when he watched her whip a worn lashing back to full strength, he grunted, which she had learned to read as astonishment, and said, "Keep those hands. Don't let this country make you forget they knew a trade before it taught them this one." And that, somehow, undid her worse than kindness would have. Weeks bled into one another. Measured by the shrinking stack of stovewood and the growing stack of cured pelts and the snow line that no longer fell because there was nowhere lower for it to go. The pass above filled enclosed, the buried road below filled deeper. The world narrowed to one warm room and a cliff and a stretch of white meadow. And somewhere in the ordinary brutal arithmetic of staying alive beside him, Nora stopped flinching when he came through the door, and Cal stopped carrying his rifle out to the lean-to at night, and two people who had each long ago decided they would do their dying alone began, without once saying so, to do their living next to someone else. She still kept a sharpened skinning knife by the bed the first weeks, then one morning noticed she had not thought of it in days, and did not put it back. The country had its own people in it, too, scattered thin as the smoke. An old man wintered alone in a half-fallen cabin in the next drainage, a broken-down former camp physician named Sam Ferris, who had doctored Drum's Hollow when it was young, gone half-blind and lung-shot and poor, used up and forgotten by the camp, whom Cal looked in on every week or so with a haunch of meat and an hour of his silence, because the old man had set Cal's broken arm once years back and asked nothing for it, and Cal Traeger did not forget a kindness any more than he would charge for one. The fever came for the old man in the deep middle of winter, on the worst possible night, the way these things always come. Cal came back from his weekly look in Moving Fast, and told her in 4 flat sentences that Ferris was down with the lung fever, burning hot and pulling at the air with a thin wet rattle deep in his chest, alone in a cold cabin with his fire gone to coals, and that a man that age and that poor in the lungs did not last such a thing alone. "Bank our stove and bring the eucalyptus off the shelf and the yarrow and the willow bark," he said, "and put on every stitch you own. We're going over there, and we're not coming back till he breathes easy, or he doesn't." And Nora, who weeks before had been left at a dead station by men who would not cross a yard to save her, put on every stitch she owned, and went out into the killing dark to help fight for the breath of a stranger, and did not think until much later how far she had already climbed from the woman in the drift. They broke through the drifts to the old doctor's cabin, and found him worse than Cal had feared, blue at the lips and barely pulling air, and the silent trapper became, for one long night, a man who knew exactly what to do with his hands. And Nora understood she was watching him fight a thing he had fought before and lost. They built the fire up past all economy and made a tent of a blanket over 2 chairs and the table, and into it Cal set a kettle just off the boil, and into the water crushed handfuls of a dark twisted herb traded up from a packer who got it off a ship, eucalyptus and pine pitch, and a wad of dried yarrow, until the tent filled with a sharp medicinal steam that pried the airway open. And the strange grace of that night was this: the old man, even burning, even half-blind, was still a doctor in his bones, and between the worst of the coughing he rasped out what to do, how cool to wring the cloths so the chill would pull the fever without shocking the heart, how much of the bitter willow bark tea was enough, and how much too much. So Nora sat in that hot, wet dark with him propped against her shoulder hour after hour. her printer-strong arms holding the frail weight of him up so his chest would not fill, her quick, exact hands doing the fine work his blind ones no longer could, dosing by his whispered count, wringing the cloths to his rasped instruction, a half-blind healer teaching a typesetter to be his hands in the dark. When the fever spiked, they wrapped him in cloth wrung out in snow melt, just cool enough to pull the heat, and he cursed them feebly for it. And Cal said, "Lo, the cursing's good. Cursing. He's breathing. It's the quiet you fight." And past the middle of the night the fever broke at last, the rattle loosened, and the old man slept, truly slept. And Nora sat in the steam with her arms gone dead from holding him, and wept once, briefly, from something that was not grief. It was in that blackest, warmest stretch of the night, with the old doctor breathing easy at last and the gray of dawn still hours off, that the silence in Cal Traeger finally cracked open, and the man began, at last, to talk. He had a wife once, he told the dark, not looking at her, his voice a low rumble she felt through the cabin wall at her back more than heard, in the years right after the war. They had a place in a low valley, and one hard winter she took the lung fever the way the old man yonder had, and Cal rode 2 days through the snow to fetch a doctor from the nearest town, and the doctor would not come, because Cal had no money to put down, and the doctor judged a poor trapper's wife not worth the risk. "I rode back alone," Cal said, "and did everything I knew, which was nothing, because I didn't know to open the air or cool the fever. I just held her and watched her drown in her own chest over 4 days, and there was nobody on God's earth to teach me what these old blind hands taught you tonight." The fire ticked. Sam Ferris set my arm the year after and never sent a bill, in a camp where every other soul had a price on every kindness. So when his lungs went tonight, I was not going to ride back alone a second time. Not for him. Not for anybody, ever again, while I've got 2 hands and a kettle and the herbs to do it. And Nora understood, all at once, the whole shape of the man, that the silence she had taken for coldness was grief 11 winters deep, and that he was still, after all these years, riding back through the snow trying to reach someone in time. And then, with the dawn just beginning to gray the shutter cracks and a saved old man sleeping across the room, Cal said the rest of it. The part that detonated the engine of the whole long winter, quietly, the way he did everything. "When I dug you out of that drift, I wasn't being kind. I was 11 winters too late to dig my wife out of hers, and there you were, somebody the cold had left for dead the same as it left her, and for once I was on time. That's all it was. So hear this once, clear, so you stop carrying it. Pulling you out of the snow bought me nothing. There's no debt between you and me, and there never will be one you didn't write yourself. The day that past clears, you're free to walk down it and go anywhere, owing me not 1 grain, and I'll grubstake you to the rails and call it a good winter's work. I didn't carry you up here to keep you. I did it because I once rode back alone to a woman the world wouldn't lift a finger for, and swore I'd never let the cold have one more soul it had no right to, while I had hands to stop it." He looked at her across the sleeping old man. "You're not bought, and you're not kept, and you're free." And Nora lay against the warm cabin wall and understood that the chain she had been braced half a winter to feel tighten had never been forged at all, and that the thing growing in that one warm room was the single kind she had never once been offered, the kind with no bill at the end of it, and it frightened her more than the fever, more than Burl Vane, more than the cold, because a debt she knew how to live under, and this she did not. The old doctor lived. By the second morning the rattle had loosened, and by the third he was sitting up demanding to know whether anyone had thought to milk the goat, which Cal pronounced the surest sign of recovery he knew. And 2 nights after that, back in their own cabin with the storm walling them in, Nora did the only thing left that could answer what the man had given her, which was to trade him truth for truth. She told him all of it, and when she was done, she set her husband's brass make-up rule on the plank table between them and said, "That's the whole of what I am. A widow who saw the one thing she wasn't meant to see, and got written off a company's books for it like a wagon they'd rather not repair." And Cal looked at the worn brass rule a long moment, then said, "Lo, your mother set type beside your father her whole life, and put that rule in your hand instead of a dowry, because she knew what your hands were worth, and it was never on anybody's ledger. You saw a powerful man rob the people he was sworn to guard, and instead of taking a cut to stay quiet, which is what 9 in 10 would have done, you wrote it true and sewed it in your hem to carry to a court. They left you to die for being honest. That's the most stubborn, honest thing I ever dug out of a snowbank." And Nora understood, taking the rule back, that the thing the world had tried to bury her for had a different name up here, and the name was worth more than the gold Burl Vane had stolen. But buried things have a way of working back to the surface, and the man who had counted on the snow to keep his secret could not, in the end, leave the burying to the mountain. Far below, in the gray weeks of late winter, Burl Vane's clean plan had developed a crack he could not stop probing. The phantom road agents could not be hunted forever. A robbery with no robber begins, after 2 winters, to smell. Worse, the territory had sent word that a company auditor and the spring circuit court would both come up the road as soon as the pass opened to go over 2 years of unexplained losses on the line, and Vane needed, before they came, for the one witness who could turn a column of stolen figures into a hanging to be safely and unquestionably dead. He had assumed she was. But a hard thing nagged at him the way guilt nags a careful man. Nobody had found a body. And then a leering old camp packer named Tuck, who ran Vane's relief stock and missed nothing, carried him a thing for the price of a bottle, that a trapper up the high drainages had been seen at the far post laying in more flour and salt and powder than one man winters on, and that the talk was the crazy hermit on the cliff had taken in some stray off the mountain in the first storm. A stray. Off the mountain. In the first storm. And Burl Vane went cold and still behind his pleasant face, and understood that his witness was alive and warm 4,000 feet up with the one man in the country who could not be bought or cowed, and that come the thaw she would walk down straight into a federal court with everything she had seen. That was the thing Vane could not bear, and he went to work that very week to do by paper what the mountain had failed to do by cold. And his haste to finish before the thaw was very nearly all of their deaths. He could not simply ride up and shoot her. A hermit trapper and a company keeper found shot would bring exactly the law he was running from. So he reached for the oldest tool a guilty man with friends in office owns, which is to make his victim the criminal. He found a soft, greedy valley deputy named Pell, who wore a tin star and owed money everywhere, and over a bottle they manufactured a fraud on top of a fraud, a sworn warrant charging that the gold missing that stormy night had in fact been stolen by the relay keeper herself, who minded the strongbox window and had then fled her post to hide her guilt, and authorizing the company's faithful special officer to retake the fugitive thief Nora Hale wherever found, any man harboring her to surrender her or stand in contempt as her accomplice. A perfect inversion. The witness became the robber became the law, and the warrant gave Vane the legal right to ride up that mountain with armed men, take the only mouth that could hang him, and call the taking justice. And in the last hard weeks of winter, in a false thaw that crusted the snow just firm enough to bear horses, Burl Vane came up the pass behind a coat of law and the courage of numbers. Deputy Pell to wave the warrant, and 4 hard men in heavy dusters with lever-action rifles behind, paid in coin to bring a woman down and not ask why, and if the trapper would not give her up, well, a warrant is a wonderful thing for making a killing look like an arrest. and a thief shot resisting lawful capture audits nobody's books. Cal saw them coming. He had cut their sign that morning on the lower trail, 6 horses where no horse should be, and he came back fast and quiet and told her the shape of it in 4 flat sentences, and Nora felt the old dead station terror rise up and meet something new the winter had built in her without her noticing, and the new thing won. She did not freeze. "How long?" she said. "An hour, maybe less," he said, already taking the rifle down off the pegs. "They'll come up the open meadow, because there's no other way to bring horses. The deputy reads his paper first, to make it lawful, and if we don't fold, they'll do it the other way. I can put you up into the rocks where they'll never find you and hold the door alone. That's the smart play, and I'll do it if you say." And Nora looked at the man who had pulled her out of a drift and refused to own her, and heard her mother's voice clear as the fire, that the only thing in this world that holds is the thing you make strong with your own 2 hands. "No," she said. "I have spent this whole winter being the thing other men decided I was. A keeper to be left, a witness to be frozen. Now a thief, because it suits a liar to call me one. I have one now. You're not holding that door alone." And he looked at her one long moment, and then did the thing that told her everything they had become across one hard winter. He did not argue, and he did not send her to the rocks. He took the old single shot down from over the bunk and set it beside the lever action. "Then we'd best be quick. You've handled the rifle at the woodpile all month and didn't know I was teaching you. Now I'm telling you." And in the little time they had, he taught her the last of it, the breathing and the slow squeeze and the way you do not fight the kick but let it come through you, and to make every shot a true one because they had powder for a fight, but not for a careless one. She set herself a place at the shuttered window, the spare cartridges laid out in a row on the sill where her hand could find them in the dark, every one squared to the next, because a printer's hands know better than any how much depends on the thing being laid ready and true before the work begins. And she pressed her husband's brass rule to her lips once, warm from her own throat, and took up her place. And she noticed it with a kind of wonder even then. In the worst hour of her life, her hands were not shaking anymore. They came up the meadow just as Cal had said, 6 riders strung out across the crusted snow in the hard flat light, and stopped out of easy range, and Deputy Pell stood in his stirrups and read the warrant across the white in a thin official whine. Every word lawful and every word bought, declaring Nora Hale a fugitive thief who had robbed the strongbox and fled, ordering her to submit to arrest and Traeger to surrender her or stand as her accomplice in contempt. And Cal opened the cabin door and stood in it, filling it, the rifle loose and ready, let the deputy finish, and said, in a voice that did not need raising, and carried across that meadow like a dropped axe, "There's no thief here. There's a woman who kept that station honest and saw your special officer open a company box with a company key and lift the gold he was paid to guard and salt the road with play-acted robber sign to blame on men that don't exist. That's why your line never caught its road agent in 2 winters. He's the one wearing the star you ride behind. And when she didn't freeze the way he arranged, he had your deputy swear out a paper calling the witness the robber, so he could ride up here lawful and bury the only soul who watched him. Ask yourselves why a company officer rides up a mountain in a thaw to kill a woman over a robbery he could keep on hunting forever. He's here for the witness. And there's an auditor and a circuit judge coming up this same road behind you with the spring. And he let it sit, and Nora watched from the loophole as the 4 hired men traded a long look, because there is a great deal of difference in a hired man's mind between hauling in a lawful fugitive and gunning down a woman to cover an officer's theft. And Cal had just moved the whole business from the first into the second in front of their eyes. It was Burl Vane who could not let it sit. because guilty men with the law in their pockets cannot bear to be named out loud, and he pushed his horse forward a length and dropped all the pleasantness out of his voice. "She's a thief. The warrant's lawful and sworn, and any man too soft for the work can ride down now and forfeit his pay," he said, and jerked his chin at the cabin. "Take them." And then Nora did the thing that ended it, and she did it not with the rifle but with her voice, because she had finally learned, up on that mountain, that her word was not worth nothing after all. She called out from the window, clear and carrying across the snow, to the 4 hired men and not to Vane at all. "He says I robbed that box. I was the keeper. I had no key. And there's exactly 1 set of keys to those boxes. And the company holds it, and he carries it. Ask him to his face to show you the key that opened it that night. Then ask why a robbery his own warrant says happened in a locked strongbox needed no lock broken. The gold he says I stole rode down this mountain in his own saddlebags, the same as 2 winters of it has, and the auditor's coming up to count what the line has lost and put a name to it. He's not afraid of me. He's afraid of the men coming up that road behind you. And he means you to do the murder that keeps the books from being read out loud. You'll hang for it the same as he will." And she watched it land on the hired men like cold water, watched them turn in their saddles to look at Vane, at Pell, at the 2 fresh warrant, and one said, "Flat, I didn't sign on for a forged paper killing matter," and turned his horse, and then another. And the courage of numbers, the only courage Burl Vane had ever been able to buy, came apart in the cold like everything else that winter. Deputy Pell, seeing his bought warrant named a fraud in front of witnesses and an auditor invoked in the same breath, lost his nerve and reined back, stammering that he had only sworn what the officer told him. And Burl Vane, left of a sudden with 2 riders gone and a deputy backing away and his borrowed authority bleeding out into the snow, made the last bad choice of the day. He clawed for the pistol under his caped coat to do by force what the paper no longer could, swinging it up toward the big still shape in the doorway. And 2 things happened at once. Nora, at the loophole, fired first, not at the man but at the thing in his hand, the way Cal had taught her at the woodpile without her knowing it, and the heavy slug took the pistol spinning out of Vane's fist and left him gripping a hand gone suddenly wrong, screaming, breathing, alive, because she had aimed to stop and not to kill. And in the same breath, Cal came down off the step and started across the snow toward the man on the horse, unhurried, levering the next round, closing the distance, and that broke Burl Vane entirely. The coward in him, the one that had always done its taking at a slant, behind a key and a star and a warrant and other men's guns, looked at the scarred mountain of a man walking toward him, with no fear in him at all. And Vane hauled his horse around and ran, the great special officer of the line running flat out down his own mountain, nothing left of all his authority but the knowledge that a forged warrant had just been named a forgery in front of witnesses who would talk. They did not have to chase him, and that was the mercy and the justice of it both. The 2 hired men who had quit first, only too glad now to be witnesses on the right side of a forgery, carried the whole of it down the mountain and did not stop talking. And when the pass opened, Cal took Nora and old Sam Ferris the long road down to where the company auditor had come up at last and the spring circuit court was sitting. And the truth, once loose, moved the way truth moves when enough frightened people decide at the same moment to stop being afraid. Nora stood up before a real federal judge and told the whole of it, and took from the hem of her underskirt the small folded paper she had written that first honest morning, dated and exact, the witness statement a snowbank had failed to bury. The auditor laid the line's books open and read out 2 winters of gold gone off the down coaches with no robber ever taken, every loss riding a road Vane patrolled, no man but Vane carrying a key to the boxes that opened without breaking. Old Sam Ferris stood up half blind and shaking and told what kind of country used a man up and left a woman to freeze. Deputy Pell, to save his own neck, turned on Vane and produced the very complaint they had sworn out together. And Burl Vane, taken trying to buy passage east under another name, was broken in open court. His 9 robberies read out before the territory, his fraudulent warrant named, the company's losses set square at last, not with a frozen woman at a dead station, but with the truth. And Nora walked out of that courthouse owing no man on earth a thing, a free woman by a real judge's word. Her name struck clean of the charge. The gold she was supposed to have died beside accounted for to the last grain in another man's saddlebags. But the courthouse was a long road and a season away, and the truest hour came earlier, on the mountain, the morning after the meadow, when the danger had drained out of the world and left it washed and blinding and still. Nora stood in the open door in the dazzle, and Cal came and stood beside her close enough that their arms touched, and neither moved away. And after a while she said the thing she had been unable to say for weeks, plainly, looking out at the snow and not at him. When the pass opens, I'm not going down it. She turned the brass rule once at her throat. You told me I was free to go anywhere in the world. This is where I want to go. And Cal was quiet a long moment, and then the man who had refused for one whole winter to make a sound that could be mistaken for tenderness reached over, slow, giving her every chance to pull away, and closed his big scarred hand around hers where it worried the little brass rule, and held it. And that was the whole of his answer, and it was enough. And they watched the sun come up white and clean over the high peaks with a saved old doctor snoring by the stove behind them. They did not marry that spring, though they would, plainly and quietly, in time, in the valley town before the same judge, with old Sam Ferris come down out of the hills for it, and Nora signed that paper, the only document that ever bore her name by her own free will, and laughed once at the strangeness of putting her name to a thing on purpose, she who had spent a winter nearly killed by other people's papers. But the marrying was never the point. The point was the morning in the door, and the choosing, and the slow turning of 2 people who had each decided to die alone toward the difficult miracle of living on purpose next to someone else. They worked the High Line together and took in old Sam, when his eyes and his lungs would no longer let him winter alone, and he lived out his days warm by their stove, telling the story of the night a typesetter set type by his whispered count, and held his chest open against the dark, which grew taller every year in the telling. And on a nail by the door, where another house might have hung a horseshoe, hung a slim worn brass makeup rule on a knotted leather thong, and the only paper kept in the whole house was a single sheet Nora had signed herself, of her own free hand, and on the evenings when Cal was laid in off the High Line, Nora Traeger would step out onto the porch and turn the rule once with her thumb. The old habit, no longer a thing to hold against drowning, but only a thing to hold, and watch the tree line for the big scarred shape of him coming home, a woman who had stopped, somewhere across one hard winter, waiting for a man with a ledger to tell her what she was worth. A company's books are the coldest cage a frontier ever built, because the cruelty does its work in a column of figures and a signed order in a warm office far away, and lets the man who balances the column call himself the law and even the victim, while the killing is done by a mountain that never gets named at the trial. Burl Vane spent 2 winters learning to rob the people who trusted him, and one false thaw learning that the cleanest murder of all is the one where you never lift your hand, certain that a young widow with no money and no kin was a thing the cold would tidy away, and the paper would explain. And it nearly did. She was one closed station and one forged warrant from being exactly the sad frozen line he meant her to be. What he did not count on is that the same cold he meant to use against her is also the thing that strips 2 ruined people down to what they are truly made of, and that sometimes what they are made of Underneath the fear and the years of keeping their heads down is the kind of stubborn, unkillable honesty that writes the truth down and sews it in a hem when staying quiet would have been so much warmer. And that stands in a doorway with a rifle and will not let a powerful liar have one more soul he has no right to. So here is what I'll leave you with, and I'd honestly like to know, because I read every last one of these. Nora Hale believed for most of her life that a woman with no money was only ever worth what the men who held the books and the keys wrote beside her name, and that the safest thing to do with a dangerous truth was carry it quietly to someone with more power than her. It took a silent man who pulled her out of a snowbank and asked for nothing to teach her that there is always another door, the one you climb toward even when it might kill you, and that the moment that saved her was the moment she stopped waiting to be rescued and named the liar out loud in the snow with a Winchester. So tell me, honest, down in the comments, if a powerful man had left you at the top of the world to let the cold do his killing for him and then come back up the mountain with a forged paper to finish what the snow couldn't, do you think you'd have gone down quiet, the way the world spends so many lives teaching us to? Or do you think you'd have stood in the door beside the one person who'd burned the paper that owned you? Tell me which one you think you've got in you. And so the lamp goes dim in the high cabin while the snow keeps falling. Stay warm, stay a while, and tell me in the comments, would you have stayed inside or grabbed the Winchester?